Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. Today, conservationists accuse the government of turning its back on nature.
Where is this win-win for nature and the economy? It seems instead nature is being pushed into last place.
We'll have more on that a little later. First, all week we're checking in with the dairy industry. Over the last 30 years, the size of the UK dairy herd has been gradually falling, while average milk yields, that's the number of litres a cow produces, has been steadily increasing. Well, that increase is partly down to using new technology like on-demand robotic milking machines. Stoll Farms in Wiltshire uses robotic milking for their nearly 700-strong Holstein dairy herd, which live indoors. Marie Lennon has been to meet farm manager Neil Ridgway and his rather quiet cows.
Very rare you'll hear a cow moo around here because they're so chilled out. The cows are chillaxed, sticking their heads out, being very inquisitive, demonstrating, I don't want to say natural behaviours obviously because it is an indoor environment, but they can express their characters and their social aspects.
Tell me about the robotic systems.
Each cow has an identifying collar. The collar in itself has been collecting rumination data, pedometer data. Pretty much it's the Fitbit for cows. When that cow walks into the robot, it downloads all of that data back to the main PC. They'll only get milked when the system says it's within its thresholds of a perfect milking. We will go in so you can see it from the robot side. The cow on our left is just starting milking.
And these red robot arms are doing all the movement. They're using sensors to find exactly where they need to go.
So what the arm has just done after the last cow, it's sanitised around any part that's going to touch the next cow, so there's no cross-contamination. You might see the red laser flashing about. 12 robots are doing 2,000 milkings a day. The cow's happily stood there, she's eating what cake she's allowed out of the trough.
This must be one of the biggest dairy operations in the country.
Yeah, on one holding to itself, post the next shed, we will be 16 milking robots. As regards of yields, we've put 1,000 litres per cow per year for the last 4 years on, so we're now producing 12,500 litres a cow.
You've worked in a variety of different systems in different parts of the country and the world. Do you think that inherently in systems like this, the cows are missing out on an aspect of life that they should have, with having space to roam and the fact that there are so many of them together?
My last job was organic. Niche markets are all good and well when there's a market there. When it comes to people in the middle of Birmingham who rely on food as cheap as possible, when you have supermarkets, it's got to be done efficiently.
With milk itself, there are lots of pressures around the price and lots of farmers are seeing their price per litre going down. You're producing here millions of litres.
9.2 million currently.
Right, so...
And the milk price dropped at We Face last week, although it was in low pence.
When you times it by 9.2 million?
It adds up, and a big part of it comes to business resilience.
That was Neil Ridgway with the numbers at Stoll Farms in Wiltshire. Now, we often talk about exports of produce like beef and dairy, but exporting farm animal genetics is also big business. The industry estimates that around 70% of the world's farmed poultry originates from UK breeding stock, while UK cattle genetics are now exported to 100 countries around the world. A new agreement with Kenya will see sheep and goat genetics exported there. The UK Export Certification Partnership is a public-private grouping which promotes the export of livestock products, breeding stock and genetics. Marcus Bates chairs the partnership, and he explained to Charlotte Smith why the trade in semen and embryos has replaced exports of breeding animals.
There's obviously a lot less risk and there are lots of benefits. For example, with embryos, the animals are born in the environment in which they're going to live. Not that these things can't be managed, but there's far less risk involved in using semen and embryos.
What proportion of this trade actually is in breeding animals now? Is that really fallen away?
Certainly in terms of the ruminants, it's quite small. For the pigs, it's slightly different. We don't have the technology to really do porcine embryos yet, so that's an area that needs more research and development.
So where in the world wants this sort of livestock genetics then?
Well, more than 130 markets around the world, from Argentina to Zimbabwe, effectively. More exciting recently, Central Asia is opening up for us. There's obviously huge potential there. China's been an enormous market for us. The whole world has UK genetics and continues to want to buy from us.
Why? What is it about British genetics that they're after?
Well, we have a tremendous range to choose from for a start. We've always been a world leader in animal breeding, not just in livestock, but also in poultry. Something like 70% of the world's commercial poultry can trace their origins back to breeding companies, mainly based in Scotland.
Does that create a worry if we have, across the world, animals and birds which share so much breeding?
Well, for example, in America, the national beef herd, they estimate 72% of the cows are either British or mainly British genetics. In terms of risk, a lot of very high-tech science goes into maximising genetic diversity within the breeds. So there are safeguards in place for that.
How complicated is it then to take these genetics and export them? Because I'm imagining it's not just as easy as shoving them in a frozen envelope and posting it.
The technology is pretty well established. The difficulty we have sometimes is removing the market access barriers so that we can start the trade. There are negotiations that have to take place in order for us to access the market. And that's where the partnership and particularly recently the work of the agricultural attachés has been so beneficial for us. So, as an example, we were excluded from the USA from sending them our breeding sheep for nearly 30 years. And more recently, since we had an ag attaché based in Washington, we've been able to get some of those barriers removed. And in the first 18 months of that trade, we exported nearly £1.7 million worth of sheep embryos to the USA.
We've also just signed an agreement with Kenya for sheep and goat genetics. How much potential for growth is there here around the world?
There's tremendous growth. Take India, for example. India has an enormous population of goats producing relatively small amounts of milk. The average milk yield of a goat in India is about 100 kilos. We have goats in this country that average 1,500 kilos. So the potential for us to impact the agriculture and the feeding of the population in a country like India through improved genetics is absolutely enormous.
Marcus Bates from the UK Export Certification Partnership. Now, as the country waits for Rachel Reeves' crucial budget today, the government denies that it's given up on a promise to create a win-win for the economy and nature. It was a pledge repeated in the House of Lords this week by Baroness Taylor of Stevenage as the planning bill was being debated.
It is the government's intention that we want to make sure, as we pursue this building of both homes and infrastructure, we do want to see a win-win for both nature and for development to deliver what we need, and we protect the very important natural resources we have around us at the same time.
Baroness Taylor of Stevenage. Well, this new planning bill has been described by some critics as a drive to build, baby, build at the expense of nature. The new legislation introduces Environmental Development Plans, or EDPs. These would mean that any scheme which could harm legally protected sites or wildlife would pay a nature restoration levy to enable the type of habitat or species to be improved overall at a strategic scale. But according to the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the government has slammed the door on vital protections for nature to create a new, untried and untested process. I asked Katie Jo Luxton, Executive Director of Conservation at the RSPB, what she felt was missing from the bill.
Well, we were very disappointed that Amendment on chalk streams, which was number 38, and Amendment 40, which was about adding in safeguards for really vital and rare and restricted species and habitats. And we really hoped that they would go through. The first one, 40, didn't go to a vote, actually. The government committed that it would test the approach on nutrient neutrality, first of all, so on water rather than species. But the Lords lost the vote on the chalk streams, which is very sad, though the government is saying it will try and take that forward through policy measures. So there were some concessions, but really we feel that the government has focused the first year on steamrolling much of our vital protections for nature, rather than focusing on the big challenge of how we can restore nature, which, when it came into government, they promised us would be a priority for them.
However, the government would say that there are still plenty of safeguards for nature. For instance, environmental development plans mean any development harming nature would have to pay a nature restoration levy, and also biodiversity net gain. Now that mitigates against development, and it is still enshrined in the bill for larger developments.
Well, we do still have some protections for nature, but this new approach around environmental development plans is untried and untested and creates some really big risks, and sort of imagines that our environmental, some of our special wildlife is tradable. We don't think you can ruin those habitats, build on them, and then make good with some nice amenity habitat somewhere else. It's simply not good enough.
Biodiversity net gain, which is where a farmer maybe will put in acres of mitigation for wildlife to compensate for building in another area, that is still enshrined in the bill for larger developments.
Well, so the biodiversity net gain legislation was brought in under a previous act under the Conservative government. This was about getting the private sector to take some of the profits they're making and reinvest them back in the public good of nature. But the proposal from this government was to actually exempt all the small sites. And actually most of the development that we see coming through our planning system is small sites. So if we took out sites below half a hectare, that's actually 97% of all the applications. Where is this win-win for nature and the economy? It seems instead nature is being pushed into last place.
Well, let me just say, on biodiversity net gain, the government has said in a statement that it is fully committed to biodiversity net gain, and it says they're exploring how to make it easier, quicker and cheaper to deliver gains for smaller developers while protecting nature and nature markets. They haven't forgotten about it at all, have they? Aren't you overstating this?
Well, I hope that I am, but all the indication really is that this isn't the case. With these new nature markets, you need to grow confidence in them. You know, lots of organisations and individuals and companies have started to invest in this new BNG market, but it is really at risk of collapsing now through this hokey-cokey that we're seeing.
Katie Jo Luxton, Executive Director of Conservation at the RSPB. That's all from us today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.